Namaskar and welcome to the Indologia Podcast, where we go deep on all things related to Bharatiya philosophy, itihas and the eternal dharma. Here we uncover ideas of great Indic thought leaders through their writings, and where I read you excerpts from must-read Indic books. And today is one of those days. Today is the 1st of May 2024, and we know what happens in May in 2024. It is the election time. Politics is in the air, it's in the water, it's in the earth, it's everywhere around us. That's all anybody can talk about. I'm getting tens and tens of messages every day just speaking about politics. A lot of them worried about whether their favorite candidate is going to win or not. Very exciting times, the political drama. And as I keep telling so many of my followers, enjoy this. This is a TV show that airs once every 5 years. So enjoy the great Indian democracy. And it is something that we should be proud of, to be honest with you, because it is a very sophisticated process of conducting elections. And I don't think that anybody anywhere else in the world is doing a better job. So, speaking of politics, we are bombarded with breaking news alerts. Yet, the truth often feels elusive. News stories, while seemingly objective, are rarely free from bias. Political agendas, corporate interests, and even journalistic choices color the narrative. So how do we know the truth of a given situation? The truth often emerges much, much later. Years later, when the dust settles on a certain era or a certain event and a clearer picture emerges. Usually when people intimately involved in the events, free from all the constraints of that particular moment, finally share their stories. They write books, they give interviews, they write articles. And these memoirs and tell-all accounts offer invaluable insights. They reveal the motivations and the maneuvers that were, at that time, hidden from the public eye. These insider accounts expose the calculations behind political decisions, the unseen hands pulling the strings. We learn about backroom deals, personal feuds, and the human element, which is pretty much always missing from day-to-day news reporting. For example, for generations of Indian students, Jawaharlal Nehru was portrayed as a quintessential statesman, a supposedly passionate freedom fighter who seamlessly transitioned into guiding this newly independent India as its first prime minister. Our school textbooks wax eloquent about his warm relationship with all his contemporaries like India's first president, Rajendra Prasad. But as years have passed by and plenty has been written by people who were involved in politics at that time, and a lot of documents have emerged now that were not available earlier, a more complicated picture has emerged of Nehru's contradictory mindset and policies that were often at odds with India's interests. And that, as you must have guessed by now, is what we are going to discuss today. We'll take the help of a wonderful book written by Shri Durgadas, who was the editor-in-chief of the Hindustan Times and the founding president of the Press Club of India. So pretty much a part of the Lutyens elite, the what we would call today as the Khan Market Gang. The book is called India from Curzon to Nehru and After. And now I will be reading you an excerpt from it. The Constitution has defined the powers of the President of the Republic as head of state and in relation to the Prime Minister, but the written word is not enough to ensure harmony in thought and deed between the two. Mutual sympathy and understanding and a sense of comradeship are required. Between President Rajendra Prasad and Prime Minister Nehru, who had shared the sufferings and the glory of fighting for freedom under Gandhi, one sensed constant friction. Fortunately, this was not permitted to erupt in the open. The president, for his part, was not sure whether he could successfully make a public issue of their differences. As for Nehru, his concern for the proprieties of public conduct inclined him to a similar course. Nevertheless, it was no secret to knowledgeable people in Delhi that Nehru looked upon Prasad as a revivalist. Nehru's rift with Prasad began in the mid-30s, when he, along with Patel and Kripalani, disowned Nehru's creed of socialism. It took a sharp edge when in 1950, Prasad decided to visit Kutch for the ceremonies connected with the reconstruction of the historic Somnath temple, which was destroyed and looted in 10th century by Mahmud of Ghazni, a northern invader from across the Khyber Pass. Nehru opposed the visit on the ground that it was not politic for the head of a secular state to associate himself with, quote, religious revivalism, unquote, of this kind. Prasad did not agree and pointed to the significance of Somnath as the symbol of national resistance to an invader. I believe in my religion, he added, and I cannot cut myself away from it. I watched the impressive ceremony in the company of Patel and the Jam Sahib of Nawan Nagar. In his anger at Prasad's defiance of his wishes, Nehru told the Information Ministry not to issue the speech Prasad made at the ceremony as an official handout. Prasad had legal talents of a high order and would have been a judge of a high court in the early 20s if he had not joined Gandhi's movement. He presided over the Constituent Assembly with marked ability, invariably bending his energies towards giving India a sound, workable constitution. Soon after assuming the presidentship of the Republic, he raised 3 points of constitutional importance in relation to his powers and those of the state governors. Prasad said he had power to withhold assent to bills in his discretion, dismiss a ministry or minister and order a general election, and as the supreme commander of the defense forces, send for the military chiefs and ask for information about defense matters. Nehru sought the advice of the Attorney General, M.C. Setalvad, who held that the president could not withhold assent to bills, but like a constitutional monarch, he could exert his influence in other ways. Secondly, he could not dismiss a minister, but he could get rid of a ministry and order elections. The power to hold elections in his own discretion was not according to the letter of the law, but could be exercised as a reserve power if the president felt strongly that parliament did not reflect the political balance in the country. The president could not send for the service chiefs, but he could send for the defense minister and direct him to make inquiries. Setalvad further held that the president, being a constitutional head, should avoid speeches which ran counter to government policy and might embarrass the ministry. Of course, when the ministry was mismanaging affairs, there was some justification for public expressions of presidential disapproval. Then came the clash over the Hindu Code Bill. Prasad did not oppose the measure, but argued that it should not be enacted and his assent sought until the issues involved had been submitted to the verdict of the people. He said he had discussed the bill threadbare with more than half the MPs and had discovered that the majority of them supported his views. Nehru was riled. He appeared to agree with Law Minister Ambedkar, who had fathered the bill, that the president was reactionary. But there was nothing he could do in the face of Prasad's determined stand. When the bill came before the parliament after the general election, Prasad supported the measure, examined its draft and made no attempt to tone it down. Nehru resented Prasad's decision to go to Bombay for Patel's funeral, but he reacted more strongly when late in 1952, Prasad washed the feet of Pandits as a token of homage on a visit to Banaras. To Nehru's angry protest, Prasad's rejoinder was that even the highest in the land was lowly in the presence of his scholar. As between the two, the general sentiment among Hindus supported the president's stand. However, all these incidents, coming one after the other, cooled relations between the two to a point where the Prime Minister's contact with the President got limited to the bare requirements of protocol and propriety, and Nehru started leaning more and more towards Radhakrishnan, the then Vice President. There was high drama behind the scenes before Prasad got his second term as President. 1956 was drawing to a close when suddenly 3 of my rival columnists, 2 in Delhi and the 3rd in Calcutta, started advocating out of the blue a case for a South Indian as president. Suspecting some deeper design, I sought from Home Minister Pant his comment on the writings. Pant replied that Nehru did not want Prasad for a second term and had Radhakrishnan in mind for the job. Radhakrishnan himself was getting old and was not interested in a second term as vice president. Nehru, he added, had had a word with Prasad, but the latter had replied that he was in the hands of the party. I called on Azad for our usual get-together on Sunday morning and told him about what had appeared in the newspapers and Pant's comments on it. I asked him his own view and he warmly replied, "Of course, I want Rajan Babu to continue for a second term, but what is his own feeling? Is Prasad willing to continue?" Azad then suggested that I call on Prasad and find out. When I asked Prasad whether he had agreed to retire or whether he would be available for another term, he replied he would be guided in the matters by the wishes of the High Command, meaning that he would go by whatever Nehru and Azad wanted. I told Azad what Prasad had said to me, and it was decided that he should take the earliest opportunity to call on him. Azad did this a couple of days later and informally obtained his consent for a second term during a walk in the famous Mughal gardens of the President's house. I announced this in my next political diary, which appeared on 18th of December, 1956. In fact, I opened the weekly column with the words, "Dr. Rajendra Prasad has agreed to seek re-election as Union President. This puts an end to speculation on the subject. The Congress High Command, it is said, conveyed its wishes some time ago through Maulana Azad. The disclosure came as a bombshell to those that were trying to build up Radhakrishnan for presidentship. A telephone call followed from the Prime Minister's house. Nehru wanted to see me. When I called, Nehru inquired how I had come to say that the High Command had decided on Prasad. I told him frankly that Azad had told me he had spoken to Prasad and that the latter had agreed. You know, Panditji, I see him regularly every Sunday, I added. Nehru replied, Yes, I know, and I took leave. The story did not, however, end at that. Now it became a battle of the columnists, my rivals plugging in the view that the High Command had not yet decided finally on the question. Nehru could not take this line in view of Azad's firm stand and the enthusiastic approval with which leading MPs and other members of the Electoral College hailed the disclosure in my diary. Nehru then called on Prasad and suggested that he could retire after doing half the term, and added that Azad had persuaded Radhakrishnan to continue as vice president with great difficulty. Prasad replied he would go by his health and might not do the full term. Nehru's expectations were, however, not fulfilled, and Radhakrishnan had to wait 5 full years before he could occupy as he had been promised. After Prasad was re-elected for the second term, I learnt that Nehru had spared no effort to get Radhakrishnan as president. He had had a private meeting with the chief ministers of the 4 southern states and told them informally that he would prefer a South Indian as president because a North Indian had held the post for a whole term. The chief ministers, as one of them confided to me, told Nehru that they were not concerned with regional considerations and were of the view that Prasad should be re-elected if he was available. They also did not accept the view that Prasad had already had more than one term in view of his election as a president in 1950. Although Pant enjoyed Nehru's confidence and was utterly loyal to him, he and Prasad thought alike on national language and culture. Indeed, Prasad often shared with Pant his inner feelings on matters on which he differed with Nehru. It was my practice to call on Pant twice a week and share morning tea with him. He was happy, he told me at one of these meetings, at the turn of events which had led to another term of presidentship for Prasad. I asked him why Nehru had attempted to dislodge Prasad. Pant replied that a group of courtiers had been poisoning Nehru's mind about the possibility of Prasad staging a coup with the help of the RSS and the Jan Sangh. Nehru wanted both the president and the vice president to be colorless politically, but like Radhakrishnan, to command respect by their erudition and standing in the community. Nehru seemed to treat every proposal for a presidential tour abroad with reserve, apparently feeling that Prasad did not project the image of a modern secular India. In the first term, he agreed to his visiting only the Hindu kingdom of Nepal in 1955. Reluctantly, Nehru agreed to Prasad's visit to Japan in 1958 and thereafter to some Southeast Asian countries. The visit was a grand success everywhere. In Japan, at the Emperor's banquet, only vegetarian dishes were served as a symbol of the reverence in which we hold President Prasad. At lunch in Hanoi on the day of the Indian festival of Holi to celebrate spring, Ho Chi Minh suddenly rose, smeared Prasad's face with gulal and embraced him warmly, exclaiming, "We do not differentiate. We follow India." In Ceylon, Prime Minister Bandaranaike told him, "India is our mother country. There can be no dispute between brothers." Soon after his return from a visit to India in 1959, Eisenhower sent a pressing invitation to Prasad to visit the US before he laid his office. He had described Prasad in Delhi as God's good man and was keen to take him personally around the country. But between Nehru and the External Affairs Ministry, the proposal was killed. While the ministry felt the time was not opportune, Nehru went on record to observe, "So many of us have been to America that it does not seem necessary for you to visit the US immediately." The president replied, "I will choose my own time." It was not much different when Queen Elizabeth, during a state visit to India in 1961, urged Prasad to visit Britain in return. Nehru studiously excluded foreign affairs from the scope of his talks with him and even discouraged him from serious discussions with foreign dignitaries visiting India. Prasad's visit to the Soviet Union in 1960 demonstrated, however, that his presence abroad could benefit India. Prasad avoided talks on foreign policy but made an intensive and fruitful study of the Soviet educational system, of the country's agricultural development, and of the manner in which the Russians had resolved the problem of a national language. He produced a 20-page note for the cabinet on language based on the lessons he had learned from his Russian visit. The president was a man of erudition and had a firm grasp of national problems. He often showed me letters and notes he had written to Nehru on a wide variety of subjects, political, social, and economic. He did this because he could not speak freely in Nehru's presence. He avoided a dialogue. He appeared to suffer from an inferiority, even fear, complex in the presence of Nehru. Whenever I urged him to convert his meetings with Nehru into a dialogue, he would say that would inevitably lead to disagreement and passionate argument. The note to Nehru on corruption was perhaps the strongest Prasad ever penned. Corruption, he said, will verily prove a nail in the coffin of the Congress. Prasad strongly supported C.D. Deshmukh's proposal for a tribunal or an ombudsman directly under the president or as an independent authority to inquire into charges of corruption and maladministration. Nehru did not reply to the note in writing. Instead, he complained to Prasad personally about what he called an unfriendly suggestion. On Kashmir, Prasad was all for the full integration of the state in the Indian Union. In his eyes, the special status accorded to Kashmir was hardly in tune with the realities of the situation. Prasad was particularly concerned about center-states relations. "Do not interfere needlessly with the affairs of the states," he told the Prime Minister. "Learn to leave them to their own devices." Of his opposition to the agitation to suppress the communist regime in Kerala in 1960, he made no secret. He said he had tried to dissuade Indira Gandhi, the Congress president, from heading the liberation movement. "Do not act in this way," he told her. "It will set a bad precedent." Asked later about this admonition, Mrs. Gandhi said she did not remember having had a talk with Prasad on this subject. He felt very strongly that India's diplomatic approach to China was riddled with weakness and a proneness to wishful thinking. The Hindi-Chini bhai-bhai honeymoon, he told me, did not blind him to Peking's ultimate aims and real feelings towards India. He was greatly upset at the Indian government's impassivity when Tibet was occupied by the Chinese Reds. His words of caution to Nehru, he said, had fallen on deaf ears. The Prime Minister had been misled by his ambassador in Peking, Panikkar. With his eyes moistened, Prasad observed, "I hope I'm not seeing ghosts and phantoms, but I see the murder of Tibet recoiling on India." I recall with interest my talk with the President after Sanjeev Reddy, presiding at the Bhavnagar session of the Congress, suggested that those who had held office for 10 years should voluntarily retire. When I asked Prasad for his reaction to this proposal, he remarked, "It is very interesting, I'm all for it. But what will Nehru do?" He confided that had Nehru resigned, in fact, he would have grown in stature and helped the nation grow in the same manner. Those close to Nehru in turn asked, "What will Prasad do?" The President had strong grounds for complaint against the Prime Minister, for he often read of appointments of ambassadors and governors in the press and was officially informed only afterwards. As a result of Prasad's spirited protest against being overlooked, an order was passed by the cabinet stipulating that all the papers relating to the appointment of governors, ambassadors, the chairmen of Union Public Service Commission, the Auditor General, and the secretaries to the ministries be submitted to him before orders were issued. Prasad took umbrage at being kept in the dark about the crisis precipitated by the resignation of General Thimayya, the Chief of Army Staff. This, he held, was a violation of his authority as Supreme Commander of the Defence Services. Krishna Menon, reprimanded for the lapse, had to apologize. Later, Prasad remonstrated with Nehru, "You're laying down bad precedents. A president who did not like you could have given you a lot of trouble." The president was getting new ideas about his constitutional role and powers. Nehru's fears seemed to be strengthened when, in an address to the Law Institute on the eve of quitting his office, Prasad suggested that legal experts study the presidential powers under the Constitution. Underlying the proposal was the president's reluctance to equate his position with that of the British monarchy and his anxiety that, as a matter of courtesy, wholesome conventions should be established in this regard. Prasad told me that Nehru had met him and complained that his remarks at the Law Institute were not calculated to promote the national interest, and that he had apparently been misled by K.M. Munshi. Prasad explained that Munshi had no hand in the affair, that the kind of study he had in mind was essentially while we are still a young republic, and that he could think of no better body than the Law Institute to undertake it. One result of Nehru's reaction was that Prasad's speech was not issued to the press. But the constitutional issue became alive in 1969 with the possibility of an unstable centre, judging by the trend of the midterm poll. 10 months before Prasad retired from the presidentship of the Republic on 13th of May 1962, he fell gravely ill and was moved to a private nursing home. Nehru feared he would not survive and ordered arrangements for a state funeral and for swearing in his temporary successor. While this was being rehearsed, Nehru's mind was exercised about where Prasad was to be cremated. He did not want the ceremony to be performed next to Rajghat, Gandhi's cremation ground, but he feared that MPs from Bihar, Prasad's home state, would insist that this site be chosen. He accordingly asked Home Minister Shastri to find a place as far from Rajghat as possible. This was a very delicate mission and had to be performed secretly. Shastri, accompanied by the Chief Commissioner of Delhi, Bhagwan Sahai, was driven by the Deputy Commissioner, Sushit Lal Banerjee, along the banks of Jamna and chose a spot a couple of furlongs from Rajghat for the cremation. Fortunately, Prasad survived the illness. The spot Shastri selected for the president's cremation was used to cremate Shastri in 1966 and became known as Vijay Ghat. Nehru was cremated on the plot of land adjacent to Rajghat and is called Shantivan. After his retirement, Prasad was preparing material for a book covering the period of his presidentship, but it could not be completed before death struck him down. He died in Patna on 28th of February 1963 in the special cottage built for him next to Sadakat Ashram on the banks of the Ganga. The ashram was his headquarters during the freedom struggle. When the news came to Delhi, Nehru told Radhakrishnan that he was going to Rajasthan to collect money for the Prime Minister's Relief Fund and would not be able to attend the former president's funeral in Patna. He added, "I do not see any reason for you to go." Radhakrishnan replied, "No, I think I must go and attend the funeral. That respect is due to him and must be paid. I think you should give up your tour and come with me." But Nehru stuck to his program. The excerpt that I just read to you was from the book India from Curzon to Nehru and After, written by Sri Durgadas. It is a fantastic read, which gives a great insight into the politics before the partition and after it, especially under the Nehru administration. The excerpt that I read for you gives us a lot of insights into the relationship between the two men, the first president and the first prime minister of India, and a lot more insight into the personality of Nehru. And a lot of his personality has been revealed to us in the last many years as we uncover new papers and new documents. And to be honest with you, first time when I read this, it was quite shocking to me that a prime minister would not go to the funeral of the first president of India. In today's day and age, it would probably be impossible. But then again, we are talking about a political party, the members of which do not even go to the Ram Mandir inauguration, probably the biggest event India has seen in a very, very long time. So it's par for the course that they do not respect a former president either. I hope you like this episode of the Indologia Podcast. If you did, please give me a good rating on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you're listening to this on. You should also follow me on the social medias. I post very interesting stories on Instagram, and I do sometimes tweet my quirky views on things on Twitter. The name is the same everywhere. It's Indologia, Indologia. You can also join my channels on WhatsApp and Telegram. And please do not forget to follow me on YouTube. I welcome your critique, your feedback, any messages that you want to send to me. Please send them to me on Instagram. Until the next time I see you, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.